Hi guys, it's me again. Today we're going to talk about something that everybody has experienced, at least secondhand, and some people unknowingly have also experienced this firsthand as well. And that is going to be the decline of critical thought. This is something that I've been observing over the past 15 or 20 years or so, and I think that it's definitely started gaining momentum recently. And I want to explain and kind of talk about and explore why is that really happening. And this is a very popular topic in conversation in pop culture. There are things like Idiocracy. There's the age-old question that people seem to be asking more often recently, which distilled down is something like, why are people so fucking retarded nowadays? And today, we're going to answer that question. And I actually think that there's a number of reasons for this that make a lot of sense. And the first thing you have to understand is that you have to understand that people need an identity. And that identity used to be tied to a religion, which, by the way, required you to do the exact same thing that secular ideology requires you to do as well. But the religion was a little bit more creative about it. And let's be honest, a burning bush is a little bit more exciting than climate change, isn't it? But I can show you guys how there's definitely a correlation there. And so anyway, this begins as a kid. And I think that nowadays kids, I feel bad for a kid nowadays. They're growing up, they're 2 and 3 years old, they're getting addicted to Cocoa Melon, then they get older, they've got Mr. Beast selling them, chocolate when there's like, oh, well, this is supposed to be healthy and it's not. They get a little bit older, they start, they turn 8 years old, they can finally write their name, and then by the time they turn 10, they learn about galaxy gas, and then they forget their name again. And so you think about it as a kid nowadays, and you're really getting spawn camped pretty hard. But anyway, here's another component to it that's very interesting. Critical thought, and I think thinking as a concept, and you can think about this with IQ tests. With IQ tests, this, as with any conversation of nature versus nurture, it's often, a lot of times, some from column A, some from column B. It's a little bit of both. You can actually train yourself to become better at IQ tests to an extent. And I think that also what's happened is that people have trained themselves to not critically think. And I think that what's happened is that if you have, your brain and you're thinking about things and you're trying to solve things out and reason them out, you train your brain. It's like a muscle, just like any other thing. And if you don't use it, you lose it. If you use your brain, you're able to use your brain more. And if you don't use your brain, you're not able to use your brain quite as much. And I think this has happened a lot, where people are effectively mentally AFK. And I think that they go AFK quite early on now in life. Because back whenever we were kids, and by we, I mean all of the other boomers that remember 3,000 years ago in 1990, and we were kids, and we would be told, you won't have a calculator in your pocket. By the way, Miss Williams, you're fucking wrong. Dumb bitch. I knew that she was dumb, and I was right. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is that we all learned how to do addition. We all learned how to do multiplication. We learned how to divide fractions. And learning math is learning logic. And learning logic is learning how to critically think. And now that there are so many tools, calculators, things that you can take a picture of it and it just automatically solves the equation on your math test, there are all of these tools that people have for them nowadays that effectively take different instances of critical thought that a person would have to do, and now that critical thought no longer has to occur. You no longer have to think about this yourself because the app does it for you. You have computers now, and it's weird because, you're having like this weird, historical bell curve where boomers, actual boomers, don't know how to use a computer. And then people that are around, I'd say like 40 to like maybe 25 or so, definitely probably know how to use a computer. And what we're seeing now, this is really scary, is young people are now, again, learning how not to use computers. This is, by the way, another thing that Idiocracy predicted. And it's that there would be a bunch of, wow, these machines, how do they work? Nobody knows. Well, anyway, nowadays, kids because these computers are so well designed, they don't really break as often as Windows 98 used to or Windows XP used to, and you don't have to go into CMD to release and renew your IP address every single time you get a new router. It just does that for its own. It does that on its own. It does that for itself. And because of that, people never really learn how to use computers. They don't really understand how the computer works. And I think that the problem with that, and I actually, and here's what's really crazy about that, is that I bet people that are 30 years older than me, 40 years older than me, would be saying this exact same thing about us with cars. Because now, every car, you don't have to open your hood to figure out the way that it works. All you have to do is plug it into a little USB thing or a connector at AutoZone. It gives you an error code, and then you take it to the mechanic, and the mechanic fixes it based off of the error code. Much better system. However, people know a lot less about cars. And I think the same thing is happening with computers now, because computers are becoming much more defined, tighter, more enclosed systems that don't require as much critical thought to reason out problems with them, because they're just better at solving the problems themselves, or in some cases you just get a new computer. It's called planned obsolescence. Very cute. And so anyway, I think this is happening also with math. And every other form of critical thought is being outsourced to some sort of machine, to some sort of AI, to some sort of thing that is external from yourself. So now the individual, the kid, doesn't have to actually think about how to solve what is multiplication, what is a fraction, what is division, etc., right? What is algebra? They don't have to understand the logical implications of algebra, because they have a computer that will do that for them. And I think the problem with that is that once you abstract so many avenues of critical thought, you, at a certain point, abstract critical thought itself. And the worst part about this is that it doesn't end in school. I think this has happened all across the entire culture. And every single group of people, and this is going to ruffle a few feathers here, and that's why I'm doing it. But there are a lot of things that, in my opinion, if you evaluate these things critically, you can easily see how they don't really make a lot of sense, and how there is a common conclusion that any normal, reasonable person would come to. I'll give you 2 examples, and we can maybe do 2 more examples. The first example is going to be the really easy one. This is the one that a lot of people can probably agree on. Have you ever seen the graphs, or like the charts, this is for the America people here, that shows how many areas are red versus how many areas are blue, and they show, oh, well, look how many more red areas for Republicans versus Democrats. Why is it that, the races are so close? Well, it's because a mountain doesn't really have a lot of people living on it as much as the same way a city does, for example. And so it's basically people that are willfully misunderstanding data. But the problem here is that I think that we've had such a long time period of willful misunderstanding that people have stopped acting. And here's another one. Climate change. This is a really big one. Now, the big concept with climate change is not whether or not it's happening, it's whether people are causing it or not. Let's use a little bit of logic here. If you light a cigarette in a room, the room will smell like a cigarette. If you light a bunch of cigarettes in a house, the house will smell like cigarettes. If you have a lot of pollution in the city will have a lot of pollution in it, and it will be unsafe to breathe in. There are a lot of places, I think there's a few places like that used to be like that in China, for example. So in a theoretical world, it would be very logical that if you caused enough pollution, that you could negatively affect the earth in a bad way. This is somehow a bridge too far for many people, and many people are unwilling to even come to the conversation of thinking about whether this is happening or not. And I think the reason why is because that type of critical thought puts them at odds with the ideology that they subscribe to. And this is something that, again, religion, we used to outsource this over to religion, but because people don't believe in that as much anymore, now we've decided to invent our own new forms of bullshit that, as I said before, are much less exciting than Jonah living in a fish, just to be honest. And so here's another one. Transgenders. Oh, this one's going to get people. Obviously, a transgender, male to female is going to have a biological advantage against a biological female, all other things considered equal. Any reasonable person knows this, and you can easily see this too, that there are very few biological females to males that then go on to compete in sports at a professional or very high level. I'm sure it's happened once or twice, but I don't think exceptions prove rules. So the point is that all of these things are extrapolations of scientific reasoning and logical reasoning that, based off of which side of a different political spectrum you're on, you are not allowed to have these opinions. You are not allowed to think for yourself. And I think that's really what I'm getting at here, is that you are no longer allowed to think for yourself, because thinking for yourself eventually takes you off of the off of the reservation or off of the range that you are supposed to be living in. You never want to think for yourself, because you could accidentally make a mistake. You could think too far. You could commit a wrong think. And when somebody does this, they get completely excommunicated. I think a great example of this is J.K. Rowling. J.K. Rowling said, obviously, the female experience is something that only biological females can experience in this unique way. Now, it doesn't mean trans women can't be women. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be treated like women, but the experience that trans women have is different than the experience that a biological woman has. This is a completely logical thing. I think that probably 90% of people think this, but people have to live with their mind in a cage and pretend like they don't. And what I think happens is that as soon as a person sees what happened to, let's say, J.K. Rowling, where she gets completely excommunicated by her group of people, right? Because she used to be a very, liberal person, etc. She got totally excommunicated. Everybody hates her now. And she also, by the way, got way more radicalized to the other side. So it does have a negative effect, too. But most importantly, the point that I'm making here is the fact that when you think for yourself, when you let your own experiences dictate the way that you see the world, you oftentimes come into a direct contradiction with the ideologies that you are part of. And people don't like to think. People don't like nuance. And I think this has always been true, right? I mean, we had Salem witch trials. They burnt Joan of Arc. Galileo was suppressed. I mean, we've always done this. But what's interesting nowadays is that it's done for a secular reason. And it's the interesting, circumstantial application of critical thinking when it's something that you've already agreed with the conclusion on. And I think that's what's really happened. And so you have people that are growing up in school and they ask questions, because, a kid thinks why is this way? And, oh, wait a minute, you can't ask that, you can't ask these, you can't think about it like this because this is the wrong way to think about it. And so now you're stepping outside of that box that you're supposed to stay in. And I think this also dovetails very well into the way that cults work. Now, a lot of cults, there is a turning point, right? When you're going from, the under level to the upper level of the cult. And this is the point where you are now given the arcane esoteric teachings of whatever madman decided to invent this cult. But before you do that, you have to do some form of initiation that oftentimes requires you to forego your own logic, forego your own thinking, disregard reality, and accept their version of reality as your reality. And the reason for that is it's a degree of commitment. How committed are you to this cause in order for you to fully be part of our in-group? And I think that now people are performing that initiation ritual at a mass level. They are basically performing the initiation ritual themselves for society to see, oh, wait a minute, this person is actually part of our team. And it becomes more important that you are following the line of thinking the group of people that you think are, or that you're part of. It's more important that you follow their line of thinking than you follow your own line of thinking. And I think that that's what's really led to the decline of critical thought. And so you have machines nowadays that think for you. So you're not exercising that critical thought. You don't need to troubleshoot anymore because the machine does that for you. And then you also have society that's actively trying to suppress every form of critical thought that you can possibly fucking have. There are a lot of things that many people can always agree on, but because of political spin, it turns into being a controversial issue. I think things like lobbying or something like that, like gerrymandering, etc. But people contort themselves into doing gymnastics to justify them because these things are what is preferential or advantageous for their side. And I think that the more that you do that, the more that you practice not thinking for yourself. You practice not actually applying your own thought, not trying to evaluate things based off of your own experiences. And the worst of all is the fact that it's not that you're not thinking, it's that you're letting somebody else do the thinking for you. And I think that's what people want, by the way. I think that there is a primal human desire to take all of your existential problems and then give them to somebody else, and then they're going to tell you all the answers. You don't have to think about this shit anymore, because that's really complicated, and it's much easier just to watch football or play video games. So the fact is that that's why I think that we're losing a lot of critical thought. We don't have to use our brains anymore, and the times that we do are usually a mistake. And I think this is going to keep getting worse, by the way. It's going to keep getting worse and worse and worse until it reaches a fever pitch where it's just a unrecognizable reality and people have to turn around. But I think that, again, being able to, it's almost like it's kind of like it's I would say it's like virtue signaling, but it's like retard signaling in a way, where you're now you're going out and you're saying these things, and it's like, okay, this is the person who's saying that, I don't want to give like a big list because it's going to trigger a lot of people in chat, but, you're going into the NPC programming of certain people, and you're saying the thing that you're supposed to say. And then once you do that, now you're part of a club. Now you can be accepted because you have decided to forego your own reality, forego your own critical thinking, and instead adopt the critical thinking and the reality of the group. And I think that that's why we don't have people that think for themselves. It's because they're afraid to. They're afraid to think for themselves, because if they do, and they think too hard, or they think too much in one direction, they could end up ruining their entire life. And you see this happen. You see this happen with someone like J.K. Rowling. Not like she's ruined her whole life, but it's just a person who is asking a question, who is trying to express their worldview, and they're completely hated by everybody. And I think that there are many such cases, and I'm curious, guys in chat, has there ever been an opinion that you think is just absolute common fucking sense, and then if you mention this opinion or you say this opinion, everybody hates you for it? And I think that the more of those that we discuss and we talk about, the more that we can get back to actually thinking as a form of coming to a conclusion rather than as a form of reverse engineering a conclusion. So it's like, instead of making up your mind on what's true and then trying to logically justify it, you should look at logic and try to, inductively decide what is actually the truth. And I would love to see things go back to that, but I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to acknowledge the things that are not that. And I think that we have so many of those nowadays in our society. And again, people are afraid to step outside of that box because you can ruin your life for doing so. And you see many such examples on social media and on the news. And I think that kids, again, are just getting farmed because they never have to critically think because machines do everything for them. And I think that's exactly what's happening. And things are just going to keep getting worse until, number one, people can acknowledge it's a problem, and number two, it legitimately becomes a problem. And I think you're probably going to see that in workplace productivity going down maybe in the next 20 years or so. But by then, we'll have everybody replaced by robots, so maybe it won't even matter. Either way, guys, that's what I think. So I'd be curious to hear, what is your example of something that is so critically obvious, but people try desperately to deny that it isn't true? And I've given some of my examples. Some people might disagree with them. That's totally okay. But, I think that many people have very similar examples. And I think that that is the real reason. And again, the lack of meaning and the lack of trying to identify with a group, or the lack of having a group to identify with, is the reason why people are willing to give up their critical thought and just immediately be part of that group instead, because it's a lot more convenient and it's a lot safer to do that. And so anyway, guys, I like making these videos. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this. I feel like these topics are sometimes a little bit heavier, so I try to be funny with them as much as I can. But overall, I really appreciate you guys watching them. A lot of people were really positive about the last one. So if people like them, I'll keep making them. And if they don't like them, well, if I still feel like it, I'll make them anyway. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.